I'm loath to talk about draft capital used to go up and get somebody because that's not going to be talked about if Mac Jones does what the Niners would want him to do, right? I mean, like it took maybe a year and a half, 2 years when we stopped talking about what Thomas Dimitroff, who's on our show Friday, by the way, gave up to move up to get Julio Jones, right? Like when Julio Jones toe-tapped in the Super Bowl with what probably would have been one of the greatest catches in Super Bowl history that we'd be talking about today if Atlanta held on to win. Nobody's saying, "Wow, look how much money, look how much they gave up to go draft him." Right? Like we don't talk about that. We didn't talk about what the Jets gave up to go get Sam Darnold until like now. Now we're talking about it because it didn't work out. So I'm kind of loath to stay away. I'm kind of loath to stay away from that sort of stuff. But put it all in a hopper though, and you're wondering if this means Trey Lance gets pushed up into 4, because if Mac Jones gets pushed up into 3, does Lance get pushed up into 4? And what decision you think the Falcons are sitting on right now, Matt Miller, on Trey Lance?
Yeah, I think that is the next logical player who gets pushed up, because there does seem to be a disconnect between how analysts view Justin Fields and how the NFL views him. So I think Trey Lance is the next name. And the Falcons do have that decision to make. 36-year-old Matt Ryan, who's seemingly under contract for 2 more years after that restructure. And I think this is where the owner, Arthur Blank, has to step in basically and say, let's draft the quarterback of the future, or let's reload and try to make a run, because you still have Matt Ryan. You still have Julio Jones. You have an offensive line that you've invested a lot of draft picks in. So do you say to Arthur Smith, hey, I hired you to work with Matt Ryan and to work with Julio Jones. Let's draft Kyle Pitts, and no one is going to be able to defend us because we have 2 anomalies, one at wide receiver, one at offensive weapon. So I think that is really the dynamic we're trying to figure out right now is, what is the edict from the owner? Does Arthur Blank say, okay, we're restarting with Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith, or is he saying we have a quarterback who maybe someday is a Hall of Famer, we have a Hall of Fame wide receiver, let's keep these guys together for a couple more years and try to make a run in an NFC South that New Orleans presumably is going to be down. The Panthers are rebuilding. The Bucs are obviously very talented, but I think you would hope that with those offensive weapons, you might be able to compete in that division and then see where it goes from there.
What decision do you make, Matt, knowing that Justin Fields and Trey Lance could be sitting there at 4, the evaluation of Ryan, Julio Jones, who is, as you mentioned, an anomaly, but that's when he plays. I mean, it's been a while since we've seen a 16-game season out of Julio Jones. What do you think? What do you think about that evaluation?
Yeah, so I actually would go quarterback. And I think the reason being, I'm exceptionally high, as I mentioned, on Justin Fields and Trey Lance. I think peeking ahead, now these guys always come out of nowhere, but peeking ahead, next year's quarterback class doesn't look as strong. So even if you want to move on to Matt Ryan next year, what is the likelihood that you're drafting at number 4 overall? Seems pretty low with a healthy Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. And then you have to think, okay, is next year's quarterback class as good as this one? Could we see a Justin Fields or Trey Lance on the board where we're selecting? I think instead of hedging your bet and saying, you know what, we'll probably be bad next year, we'll get a quarterback in the future. I think you look at it and say, now's the time to get our guy in the future, because we don't expect to be drafting in the top 5 again. And we don't want to be in a situation where we have to trade 2 future first-round picks to get up into the quarterback market.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.